Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the rise of progressive web applications. My name is Chris Jorgensen. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Unleashed Technologies. Our team has seen a huge rise in interest on this topic over the last 6 months, and we're confident that today you'll find the content will provide a strong foundation on PWAs. For those of you who do not know us already, Unleashed Technologies has been dedicated to creating award-winning websites and digital experiences for our clients since 2007. We have a particular focus on open source web technologies, with our primary platforms being Drupal and WordPress. Our team is always watching for emerging technologies, and a few of these that we're tracking this year are VR, personalization, voice, and blockchain technology. At this time, I'll be turning things over to our CEO, Michael Spinosa, who will be leading today's webinar. Michael has previously presented on the subject of PWAs at the 2017 Business Information and Media Summit and the 2018 Baltimore Business Journal Social Media Summit. He will also be featured on PWAs in the March 2018 edition of eHealthcare Strategies and Trends. Michael also currently serves as VP of Technology for the American Marketing Association's DC chapter. Michael, it's all yours.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you. Sorry, I had to clear my throat there for a second. I'm excited to talk about the rise of progressive web apps today, and I really do believe that this is a compelling story of a revolution born from common sense. What I hope to accomplish today, and I'll show you some agenda here. Hold on, there we go. Had to get it advancing. Apologies. On the agenda, what I like to present to you today is I want to start with a prediction. First, I'm going to give you a prediction, and I'm going to kind of put some skin in the game there. I'm also going to talk about what are progressive web apps. What I want you to take away from today is a full understanding of what a progressive web app is. And I also want you to understand why are they valuable. And then, of course, I want all future credit for when you learned about this and how you're using it in the future to relate directly back to me, almost like a trademark. So every time you use the word, you bring up my name. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll start with the prediction. So what if I told you that in 18 months, progressive web apps will become as common as websites or mobile apps, as important as responsive design, and create engaged audiences organizations dream about? Today is February 22nd. It's a Thursday. I'm saying 18 months. That gives me a prophecy maturity date of August 2019. Now, you'll notice that I didn't put a date on that. That's because I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So I get that extra 9 days to be right about this. Now, these are my own words, no one else's, but I think what I'm going to present to you today, not only in terms of what it is, but who's using it and how, the success that they're seeing, will quickly yield that I'm correct, that if you're not addressing this today, you will be addressing this within this time period. So why don't we go ahead and jump in with this prediction into what are progressive web apps. So what are they? I think Smashing Magazine probably defined it best when they said a website built using web technologies but acts and feels as an app. The one thing that I do want to specify that this is leveraging web technologies, but it's not proprietary just to websites. It can also be for web applications for lots of different uses. PWAs sit somewhere in the middle between websites and mobile applications. So if we look a little more detail, it was built by Google by 2 engineers out there that says, PWAs built using Google technologies, and they want to combine the benefits of both responsive websites and native applications because there is a need there. So if we look at the need and what drove this innovation, we quickly find that there was no middle ground, that there was this big chasm for small to mid-market companies, particularly if you look at private companies that are for-profit or associations, big in membership association. There's a huge chasm here to stay relevant in an age of digital transformation. Now, what I mean by that is a lot of the apps that private companies or associations or any other group would create are just lost in the App Store. At the same time, they couldn't deliver the impact and the value that they wanted to through a traditional website. So let's look at the strengths and weaknesses of both platforms to understand where the progressive web app sits and what it actually is. So when we look at mobile app strengths, they're extremely fast. They support offline content, push notifications, and so that you understand how I'm defining push notifications. Push notifications are, when you get a notification at the top of your phone that says, this article has just been released. Take a look at this. Come back here. Anything to re-engage with the application itself. In-app transactions, enhanced transition and design experiences. What I mean by enhanced transition and design experiences is that previously in a mobile app world, you could only that was one of the few places you could have a really, really compelling experience that was away from some kind of traditional norm. In terms of navigation, could be very intuitive. You can swipe and swoosh and move things around left, right, up, down. Maybe you put the menu over here. Maybe there was no menu. You could just do very creative things with that. That wasn't really previously available on the web to create that kind of experience. Now, on the other side of that, the mobile app weaknesses was first that there was multiple code-based management. Now, there are some frameworks that allow you to work across different phones, but even then, you had to modify each code base to work on all these different phone models with all these different operating systems. So primarily, we have Apple, which is iOS, and Android, which is a myriad of different Android operating systems, but you had to have a version for each one of these that worked on older phones and newer phones. And if you have mobile apps today, you know how quickly that this can scale out of control. That ended up in a high total cost of ownership because you had to develop for all these native platforms, and then you had to keep maintaining them. And every time new things kept coming out, you had to make sure that you were keeping up, and it was a very furious pace. There's long submit cycles into app stores. If you've ever submitted anything into an Apple store, for instance, from an app perspective, you know that it can take as short as 2 to 3 weeks, but as long as months, depending on what the feedback is on your app, what you're doing, and how it's been built. And you don't want to get lost in a sea of apps. There are millions of apps there. It's very difficult to find yours. You're doing a very direct push for people to engage with what you've built. Now, on the other side, the web technology side, we had different strengths. There's a single code base. There was one spot where everything was generated from. It's device agnostic. It didn't matter. It doesn't matter what kind of phone you're using or what you have. It worked across all of the different platforms. There was adaptable design practices, and there was flexibility in that. There was single point management. Now, when I talk about single point management, I don't mean the same thing as single code base. I mean, first of all, the developers do work in a single spot. They do have one spot where they can do everything for web technologies, which is a value all in itself, that they don't have to manage multiple code bases. But I'm also talking about your administrators, your marketers, your content providers, publications experts, anybody that would interface with the website to drive value for your particular organization. And it was not dependent on platform specifics. You didn't have to follow any wonky rules per each platform of what this supported and what that didn't support and back and forth. The closest thing that you got to that on web technology was supporting very old and outdated browsers. But even today, we see that the rest of the world has kind of caught up with how far they go back on what they're going to support. So we've limited the exposure there. Now, on web technology's weaknesses, previously we were unable to provide push notifications, so you couldn't really reach back out to someone and say, I've got something that you want to see. I need you to come on back and take a look at it. Or you're going to want to know that your bill is overdue. So please click here and let's get it taken care of. Cumbersome to re-access the app via URL. It wasn't really repeatable because you couldn't expect someone on web technology to go back to go to their browser, to type in the URL over and over again. Even if they saved it as a bookmark, that was still a process, and a process that we all know people don't take. Very few people have websites bookmarked inside their mobile phones, which is absolutely true. Transition and UX challenges. So when we talk about user experience, that kind of goes hand in hand with what we were talking about with enhanced transition and design experiences, which was a mobile app strength. We weren't able to create those really unique looks and feels that was very important actually to publications. Anybody producing magazines, anybody producing a lot of consumable content, I think one of the most important things that they want to do is they want to create experience that's very, very engaging. They could do that in mobile apps, but then they lost all the SEO. At this time in web technology, we didn't have the capability to do that. Web technologies, when we look at the full stack, can present performance issues. We are in the business of web, and we understand performance issues all too well. And we also understand how Google feels about it. Google, Bing, and all of them. It's a constant balancing act, and just the very act of getting to a PWA resolves a large number of those issues that we'll talk about. And then next we have, and I apologize there, next we have the 10 defining laws. So now that we know what these strengths and these weaknesses are, and we're defining the PWA, a progressive web app sits in the middle of these two things. It's basically leveraging the website of technologies with all the goodness that comes from a mobile app. So what if I told you that you could have a mobile app experience without asking anybody to download anything and having it all stem out of a singular code base and decrease your total cost of ownership? There's 10 defining laws for that. The first one is progressive. Now, progressive is not necessarily what you think it means. It means that it works no matter what on anybody's phone, tablet, desktop. It could work in a kiosk. It doesn't matter, regardless of the browser, as long as it uses correct core tenant technology. And all that means is major browser types, Mozilla, Firefox, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, all of the majors, anything, Edge, anything that you would use. Responsive. I want you to think past what most people would think responsive design is. It's following the same mantra, but it's meant to be responsive in the sense of any form factor, anytime, but take it out of the context of only thinking of your phone, tablet, and laptop. Start thinking of it in context, like I said before, of maybe a kiosk or a TV monitor somewhere else, because when a PWA can interact with anybody anywhere and on a touchscreen level, so that changes the nature of responsiveness in its entirety. When we think about a browser on a phone, we think about pulling up and down to scroll, but we don't think about swiping right and left to change the pages or the articles, to change the different sections that we're in for potential PWA, a web app. It's connectivity independent. So it doesn't matter if you're in the basement, in an elevator, or in an airplane. Depending on what you want to be there, you can have an offline mode where people can simply view your content all the time. This was a big thing that pushed people towards mobile apps, because they had a lot of people across the world or different locations that wouldn't always have great connectivity to the internet. Now, that's far less of a problem today, but even with that being said, it's in tremendous value that people are getting value from the app full time. Now, app-like, it has to have this, I call it the swooshes and swishes. It has to have that feel where I can pull up, I can pull down, I can have a navigation that's not just the hamburger menu if I want. I can have really great graphics and transitional experiences that people are going to fall in love with that would be in a mobile app. Fresh content. Now, this is an interesting one on the 10 defining laws, because I don't want people to think that when we say fresh content, we mean, oh, you need to have a plan for keeping this up to date. What we mean by fresh content is PWAs will update content without a refresh. So if you've ever used or you use Twitter Lite, that is a progressive web app. So you can just be looking at the screen on the Twitter Lite version, which is just it feels like an app, but it's not an app. And then all of a sudden, 4 more notifications come in. A PWA must update without a user having to take an action to force a refresh. For most of you today, I'm going to imagine that if you were, I'm going to make it easy, you're on the home page of your website and there's some dynamic content there. If you added something and there's 20 people on the site, no one would know that you added something until you hit the refresh button or they went to another page and came back. That's what we mean by fresh content. This would change in front of them in real time without them taking any additional action. Safe and secure, I think probably for the benefit of this call, everybody understands that. It needs to be secure. It needs to be HTTPS. Now, this is where it really starts to get interesting in items 7 through 10. It's discoverable. So these apps can be found by search engines. They're publicly available, and the information about them and what they do and how they're tagged through W3C allows them to be discoverable in search engines. So people could Google and find your progressive web app. This is very powerful, and it very much changes what the value of something that operates like an app is. Because today, with anything that's like an app, like a mobile app, you have to give very specific instructions for someone to find that. It's very much a push, and it's a hard push. It's a hard marketing sell. It's re-engageable. We can now do push notifications to the phone. We can do push notifications to the phone just like it's an app. So if for instance, I'll give an association example. If you release the latest version of your magazine or new articles on legislation, and it's important, people that are signed up for those notifications will immediately get them at the top, and they can click right back. I'm going to show everybody on the private side and association side the kind of numbers that people are pulling down by leveraging this kind of technology. Finally, I'm going to wrap these two together for items 9 and 10. Installable and linkable. You may have already had progressive web app experiences, and you didn't even realize it. So if you've gone to a website and it says add this to your home screen, ? And you just have to hit the add button, that is a progressive web app. So somebody has taken the first steps in making a progressive web app, so it eliminates, we talked earlier about one of the big drawbacks of web-based technology is that people would have to type in this URL every time. Now it's installable with an icon straight to your home screen, and it's also linkable. So now the URL has become a friendly thing, not a drawback, because if somebody shares that URL with somebody, then they can just add it to their home screen. And now you're using, right now, if somebody tells you to go check out an app, they go tell you to check out an app, and in your own time, you might go search the store, check it out, and download it. As an example, there are other ways, of course, but just highlighting it. They just share the URL with someone in a text message or something, pop it up, and they can immediately put the icon on their phone without having to sign off on it's going to do this, 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 and this. Is that okay? Now, to do this, and let me back up a second. So the progressive web app, if you haven't figured it out, is, these two Google engineers, and it's Francis Berryman and Alex Russell, and there's a great video about this that's actually on developers.google.com, just for I/O. I think it's 2016 or it might be 2017, talking all about this. They basically, when we listed our strengths and weaknesses, they said this is why people don't use web technologies for mobile app-based things, because a lot of people really don't need a mobile app. Unless you're doing Clash of Clans or you're creating video game experiences or very proprietary things that need to harness all of the power and all of the hardware of that phone, you're overextended. So by solving the problem with something called service workers and using these 10 defining laws, we're actually creating a world in between. And that world in between is fast, it's efficient, it solves a bunch of web problems, as well as creates a whole bunch of new opportunities. So what does that look like today? So you'll notice that I've got two images here. On the left is a big PHP stack, and this gets a little technical. And then on the right is two boxes, and we're going to talk about how these are separated. Now, Unleashed Technologies works in Drupal, Magento, WordPress, and Symfony. Basically PHP derivative CMSs and web application languages. But this will work with anything. So if you are on any platform, whatever you're doing, the chances are that you can quest after this architecture and get to where you need to go. So for instance, here we have an example of, on the left, this is a traditional web architecture, and then there's a bunch of caching layers above it to make it go really fast. But for the most part, when you use WordPress or Drupal or Magento, or let's say other things like Sitecore, Episerver, any of those web technologies, the templating system in the HTML is built into the CMS. It's built into the CMS, and that's what you're using. This has been problematic for web in general, particularly as Google continues to hound down on site response times, because the total impact of that is huge when we have to do all of these things at once. And I'm sort of reducing this down to its most basic essence. Now, when we look on the right, we see that we're separating those items. So the CMS database, as we're calling it, has a REST API. It's doing all the heavy lifting in the back. Imagine that there are two layers now, and they're just trading data back and forth. So the CMS database pushes all the information up to the decoupled front end, and what you're seeing is a lightning fast decoupled front end powered by some very specific technologies that also share the load between not only the person serving the page, i.e. the company, but the person consuming it, the device owner. So we see in the stack, templates, HTML, JS, all of these things are happening in the decoupled front end. All of the design, everything is featured up here. The CMS database provides all of the functional number crunching and things like that. Now the service workers interface with the decoupled front end. Now we're going to go next slide, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the nerdier aspects of the technology so that you can understand it. But this is a very important slide. So for PWAs to work, ideally we really want the architecture on the right, which is different from as it stands today, probably with like 80-90% of the internet. That's not a stat from anywhere, but just from what I see, from what I see after a decade in web and bumping into all the different clients, what we see right now is far more common on the left. The right is where the web is going. And it's for this reason that if we have a decoupled front end, we can build PWAs out of it. So let me go here. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the key technologies to a successful decoupled architecture that eventually lead to what we call a progressive web app are JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. If you're not familiar with those things, certainly give us a call. That's a much larger discussion for another time. Excuse me, we'd be happy to go into that, but these are the three core front-end technologies that are needed. Now, what's interesting is JavaScript frameworks. There are two major players right now, and it's not by accident that the two biggest players in social and trying to get data to people are the ones that have created the most successful frameworks. So we have two here. We have Angular and React.js. Chances are you probably heard one of these two phrases before and know that it had something to do with web technology but didn't know how it interfaced. Well, it's very much for A, that decoupled architecture, but B, the progressive web app. So these are the two major players. Angular was created by Google, and it's best known for modern web platform capabilities to drive app-like experience. It's very high performance. It works offline. React.js, I mean, they're direct competitors. They're very similar. They provide slightly different value. I'm a favorite to Angular, and the reason I like Angular as a CEO and a business owner is because the service workers come pre-canned, ready to go. Meaning these service workers are a new layer of technology. When I talked to you in the beginning, I said the PWA is basically a mobile app that's built off web technologies that saves you a ton of money when I sum it up. But it's all born out of either your web application, your website, whatever you're doing. The service workers are what allow things like to make it installable, where it puts that icon on your phone. It's what allows us to do push notifications. It's what allows us to do instant updating of content. And we can do even more dynamic things with service workers. We're only scrapping the surface. But Angular comes and the service workers are already there, ready to go. Now we have to configure them, but they're there and they're present. That's why I'm a favorite for Angular. React is a little bit more lightweight, but the new Angular is my favorite. So this is the web technology, and I'm going to back up in the slides for only a moment. That decoupled front end is driven by these. So from here to here is driven by these technologies. I think that if the majority of websites that are out there today will be featuring this kind of build moving forward in the future. And there will also be people, remember, you can take your existing technology today and make it a decoupled architecture. You don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. So we can talk about that next. But why are they valuable? Why are they valuable? Why do I care about this? So first things first, I want to talk about the challenges with native applications. It's definitely an ongoing budget item. Now, I would argue that the web is as well. I mean, technology is an ongoing item, but there's different types of investments. And for most native applications, for most organizations, are something that they become trapped in. They built this thing not sure if it would be successful. It may or may not have worked out, but now they have to keep updating it and keep it moving forward, but they're not necessarily enhancing its feature set. They're not necessarily growing it that they want. They're doing mostly management, maintenance, and bug fixes. 51% of US smartphone users fail to download any new apps each month. Now, it's not on here, but there's another great point that I wanted to point out. The majority of smartphone users download one app a month, and if they don't get value in 3 days at this point, they just delete it off their phone. Now, I think these are very powerful statistics, and if you have developed a mobile app, you know what I'm talking about. You've seen success and you've seen failure. A full 94% of revenue in the App Store comes from just 1% of all publishers in the store. So when we look at that kind of data, it becomes even more concerning because we're lost in a sea of apps. Maybe we're trying to generate revenue or at least get engagement of some sort, and we're just not really winning that challenge. And I think that this is pretty well known at this point. I doubt that I'm telling the constituency on the phone anything that they don't know, whether through experience or hearing from a peer. So what are the core benefits of progressive web apps? Every person here that has a website has had issues with loading. Loading times, trying to keep those load times down, wrestling with that. Because of the decoupled architecture, not only is the PWA lightning fast, but the core technology, if it's built off the website's lightning fast, and I mean sub 1 second. If you want to check out what I'm talking about, take two of our websites, for instance, that feature decoupled architectures, which is blog.usni.org and supernus.com. So that's blog.usni.org and supernus.com. You'll find that those sites load instantaneously. They are featured a decoupled architecture, and they also load as you scroll, especially on the blog site, which is very interesting. But why is that valuable? Because Google is punishing people like crazy for load times. And we put lots of caching layers, lots of things in front. This gets a little nerdy on the technology side, but you know, there's caching that we do inside the actual platforms. There's things we do with load balancers and varnish, everything that we can think of under the sun to make our website faster. Well, when we start moving towards a decoupled architecture using these frameworks for PWAs, it doesn't make sense. It makes sense to make your website a PWA. Why wouldn't you? They don't know the difference of the experience. You don't have to make it completely different either. So now you have these instant loads on mobile, on 3G networks and on phones, and Google's shooting you through the roof. Plus, everybody's in love with the experience they're having with their website, which brings me to the second core benefit, which is this interactive experience. This interactive experience is secure and reliable across all devices. We have far less troubleshooting to do. We're able to give push notifications and increase retention and conversion rates by more than 50%. All of the case studies that I will show you will show dramatic improvements in how people engage, because it makes sense. If you have content that people need to consume and you're telling them directly on their device, and the reason I keep using device is because I'm fairly certain that most people on this webinar today are assuming the phone. They'll be like, yeah, I get it. I get a push notification of my device, which is my phone. Well, you can also get it to your laptop. It's not just pushing to the phone. Remember, it's completely agnostic. So it's notifying people at their desks that new things are coming. So it's much more than that. As long as they're logged in and we can identify, it works. If they've accepted on that device to have those things, that's exactly what's going to happen. Lower costs. Some people have reported as much as 10 times savings on mobile apps. I think that depends on what you have, but there's no doubt because you're building out of your core web application or websites. There's lots of different ways. You can have multiple PWAs come out of a single web presence. You can have lots of different web applications, each with a PWA. Any way you slice it, it's cheaper, it's easier to manage. You don't have to worry about all the different devices that are out there, and you're able to provide the same experience. It makes sense that you'll spend less time maintaining it and more time growing it and making it a really valuable product. What's the value of being able to actually view the data, saying, oh, this is broken, fix it. Oh, this is broken, fix it. A home screen icon. A home screen icon is one of the biggest barriers that needed to be overcome for web technologies to be practical, and now I am talking about mobile devices. So by adding add to home screen and allowing people to put an icon on their phone, we overcame a major challenge. And of course, offline content. Now that people, and remember, offline content is defined by who creates the progressive web app. You don't have to do that. I don't know if you would specify it as a full progressive web app, but you may not have a need for that. Or if you do have a need for it, you may only want certain types of information to be available in an offline capacity. But it is an amazing feature, and it was another big barrier, and that has been removed. Now, who is using progressive web apps? My guess is that the vast majority of people on this webinar today have interfaced with progressive web apps, and they may or may not know it. So for instance, here are some of the brands that right now, I'm sure you're familiar with Lyft and the NFL and Forbes and Twitter and Carnival. But what you may not be familiar with is to what extent they're being used. Excuse me. So for instance, the Washington Post is moving fully to a PWA model and already has. So if you go to the Washington Post and you get push notifications on your phone, you realize that. Lyft is moving their entire rideshare application. Just to show you how powerful a progressive web app can be, Lyft has moved their entire thing into a web version. Now, you may still have the app, and the app works, and they have both options, but they're moving entirely to a progressive web app for what we talked about. I use NFL. I'm a big NFL fan. I no longer use their mobile app. I use solely their progressive web app because it's the same information, and I don't have to have all that extra overhead. Now, I want to go over some case studies of what the kind of results are from the progressive web apps. So Alibaba is an enormous enormous e-commerce site. They moved to an entirely PWA-based architecture. The immediate results of this was a 76% higher conversion rate across all the browsers. Now, here's what's interesting, and this is going to be consistent across all of our case studies today, is that 14% more monthly active users on iOS, 30% on Android. Those are phones. That means people weren't using the app as much anymore. They were still using their phone, but they were using it in the context of the progressive web app because they would prefer to be interfaced with this way. It's easier, it doesn't require an action for them, and it also drove their device numbers up because if you look at the very next bullet, because of the add to home screen feature, it's the small things. It's the small things. They have a 4x higher interaction rate, meaning once people were able just to add this to the home screen, they got so much more interaction from their existing constituents that their traffic went through the roof. Now, I'm a big fan of cruises. I'm a Royal Caribbean guy myself, but Carnival's awesome too. I believe Princess Cruises has done something similar as well, but I'm not sure, and I don't have my hands on a case study for it. But they provide services both outside and on the boat, leveraging progressive web apps. And they do that by, on the boat, they have their own internal containment of Wi-Fi. People aren't connected, directly to the internet, but of course off, they use it the same way everybody else does. But Carnival Cruise Line provides, personalized and engaging communications to its customers that are very important. And what I mean by that is, if you've ever been on cruise, you got to know when you can check in, when you can drop your stuff off, what's coming up. Don't forget to set your schedule. It's very much a planned occasion. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. But they want a greater interaction. So by going to a progressive web app model, they got past a major barrier, which was all these email reminders and things that they were constantly sending out were not taking the effect that they needed. So a 24% opt-in to push notifications. So when people were visiting their itinerary online, they would say, would you like push notifications? 24% said yes, 16% on the desktop and 32% on mobile, respectively, for the way the devices panned out. They had a huge upgrade in how their constituents, how their customers were interfacing with them, and a 42% open rate. All this stuff was previously ignored. So if you know anything about cruises, people would show up and say, what's a drink package? What is this? What is that? And they wouldn't understand what the process was. This helped them not only understand the process, it also helped them understand everything that was going on in the boat and what was available to them. Twitter Lite. I have a feeling that probably a large group of people are using this. 65% I'm not going to go over the Twitter model. I think we're all pretty clear on that. But 65% increase in pages per session, 75% increase in tweets sent, and a 20% decrease in bounce rate. For me, what I hear the most of is I don't know how to keep my people engaged with us. I don't know how to get our visitors, our users, our people to continue to engage with us, necessarily buy our products, read our content, actually interface. And if you notice, everything here is about it's not just about spawning new action, it's more about how do I get the people that are already interfaced with my brand, with my organization, to be a contributor. And that is the bridge that PWA builds. So when we look at these, we got decreased bounce rates. There's no metric here for how much engagements increase, but it stands to reason by the number of pages per session and the number of tweets sent that their engagement numbers must be through the roof from doing this. Now, the Washington Post is one of my favorite because this was a brand that's recently been purchased, but it had a lot of issues. It was trying to find its way on the web, and it did. And it did so in the fact that they have sub 1 second load times that launched them back into relevancy, not only with all of us out there, the readership base, but with the search engines, and everybody's clear with accelerated mobile pages. But outside of that, what's most important is that you could get all this content offline. And they were one of the first people to do it. So you could get updates, go look at those, download them, check them out while you're traveling on a plane, do everything else. They kept their look and feel very close from the main website to the phone version. But if you look at that gear, and if you go check this out on your phone, you can see that you can actually configure your PWA. What push notifications do you want? Do you want a home screen button? All these things. So they switched to a much more significantly more focused subscription model, and their numbers have gone through the roof because people keep coming back to Washington Post, and then they're hitting them with that subscribe for even $1 a month or whatever the amount of money that they have specified, and people are coming back to see those articles and they're getting that value. They're more inclined to click yes, so their conversion rates have gone up substantially. Now this source is from 2016, but so much has happened since then. I would highly recommend that you check out case studies on the Washington Post and progressive web apps. Now, Forbes was another big one. One of the things that we talked about was creating that really powerful visual impression, and Forbes was one of those groups that would just refuse to sacrifice anything in terms of a visual experience, a user experience. And progressive web apps gave them the platform they needed to provide an app-like experience. I mean, these images take up the full screen. Some of them have movement. All of this context is now searchable, which it was never before in a mobile app. And they're aiming for 80% of all their visits to be from mobile devices. I think that has already happened. I mean, the response times for the size of images they have and the impact that they're making is incredible. And they're splitting that load through that front end framework, that JavaScript framework. Because remember, we're putting some of the burden on the actual device to do some of the loading. That helps significantly in decreasing load times. Now, I know I blazed through this. I know it's set for an hour. I'm guessing I'd probably only talk for 35, 40 minutes. But what I really want to do is just really honestly get you in the mindset, in the direction of what is a progressive web app and what is the value of a progressive web app and how it can potentially work for your organization. I love question and answer, and I want to answer really great questions and something that's practical to the world. So please, ask me any questions that you have. I'd be really excited to take them right now. I don't know, Chris, do we have any questions yet?
We do. So, Mike, our first question comes from Vanessa. She'd like to know, can you have closed areas, for example, members only section with the PWA?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you would lose none of the features that you would have with the standard website. So a lot of associations or different groups have member-only resources. You would absolutely, here's the cooler part, you can retain the login securely. And I think that has a huge value. So yes, the answer is yes, you can have member-only content. They can log in, but we can better secure that login and you can retain it. So as they're having that experience, everything's secure.
Great, thank you. Our next question comes from Sarah. She asks, what do you feel is the best real-world example of a PWA currently in use?
Oh, that's a great question. For me, I'm a sports fan, so for me, it's how everything impacts you. I would say my two favorites are in here, and they are the NFL and the Washington Post. I think the NFL was one of the first people to move towards a progressive web app framework, and they've done a really good job with that. I think that the Washington Post notification system is the best and most mature. Those are the ones that I like. I'm on Twitter. I definitely like Twitter, but I'm just not over the moon about it. I think it could have some better aspects to it. If you want to see a really, really great PWA too, you've been using it for a long time, it's Facebook. Facebook has been one giant PWA forever. We just didn't have a name for it, and it's finally gotten a name and a direction.
Mike, our next question is from Paul, and he asks, what do you see as the biggest obstacle for PWAs in replacing the traditional mobile app market?
Replacing, I'm going to say I don't see a lot of obstacles, because I think when you talk to most people, they don't need a mobile application. They have a set of information that they want to bring attention to in an impactful way, but it's not enough to warrant building a mobile application. I think the biggest obstacle is understanding that there's a new trend coming and being on top of that trend, being willing to take the dive in the early onset. For many people, I have a feeling this is their first introduction to progressive web apps, and they're probably wary of it. I would not be wary of it. I think that this is going to be as big, as I mentioned, as responsive design. So, and by the way, if you do a decoupled architecture to get halfway there, you're still doing yourself an incredible service, because you're improving your web presences on so many different levels. So just by taking what you have today and decoupling the architecture, you've already taken such a huge step forward. So I would say the only real obstacle, I would say, is if you are a game builder or you have something that's really specific to leveraging all the heavy lifting graphics and the 3D rendering of your phone. I think that that's where you can run into some obstacles. But then I would argue it probably should be a mobile app.
Thanks, Mike. We've got a bunch of questions coming in, so hang tight, guys, because we'll get through each one of them. A follow-up from Vanessa. She asked, we have mobile apps for our conferences. It would be a great benefit to move towards a PWA. Is this an easy implementation with Drupal?
No, it can't. So my answer is it depends on what. Event management is a crazy thing. And what I mean by that is some people have very robust event apps, other people do not. I would say the most common feedback I've gotten is moving event-based, I'm not sure how to word it. Those event apps and the constituents they deal with, moving those capabilities to a progressive web app. Right now it's a build versus a buy, and what I mean by that is you have to build that technology, so that could get expensive depending, or more labor intensive depending on what features you needed. Like, do you have a bunch of course tracks with lots of different speakers? Are the people interfacing with each other over the progressive web app? If they are interfacing with each other, what do their profiles look like? I mean, there's basic. Event apps have had a long time to mature. If you're asking me if I think progressive web apps will take the place of event apps, you betcha. I think if you're a forefront leader for that, though, it's going to be more expensive than you expect.
All right. Another association-related question comes from Krista. She asked, do you have an example of an association currently using a PWA for offline reading? Can it be used for a scientific journal, for example?
It absolutely can be used for a scientific journal, for example. Everything I have right now for that is in process, meaning PWAs are very new. It's very early to adoption. I would look at decoupled architectures first. If you wanted to look examples of offline mode, remember the type of content's in Descript, whether it's journals, publications, even books. For e-readers or whatever it is, it's in Descript. It's can I get it offline or not get it offline? So the answer is absolutely. I guess that would be the best way to answer that question. For Krista, I would say contact me offline and I might be able to show you some things.
Awesome. Okay. Next question from Neil. This is a little bit more technical, but Angular versus React. Is the service worker advantage the only reason you prefer Angular over React? If not, how, let me just give you a little bit more. If not, how would you compare, contrast advantages, disadvantages?
Well, it's interesting. For me, at the level that I am in technical depth, I mean, my own staff fights over this, React versus Angular. And right now, we're not completely committed to either direction because they both have their advantages and disadvantages. If you're asking me that I love them from the higher level because I feel like I can get to my end goal faster. Now, my team, other members of my team will say, well, it's a little more cumbersome to work with. Other members on my team will say, it's constantly improving. That is a wonderful question. I think it's one that if you wanted some technical feedback on that, I would get you with one of our lead devs, and they would talk about the strengths and weaknesses of both of those platforms. Because I don't think that I'm the right guy to answer that. I hope that makes sense, Neil. I'm the high-level guy. For me, I want the business goal to be accomplished. That's what I'm about. So, but they will sit there and take my business goals and then translate them.
Thanks, Mike. Another question comes from Kyle. Has there been an implementation of AR with PWAs? How well does AR implementation follow the 10 defining laws of PWAs?
I would say yes. You can see examples of it very frequently in like Facebook, the immersive experiences they were doing. Those are all web bound. You're not installing anything, so those are coming over the PWA layer with their decoupled front-end architecture. So you are seeing those, depending on how you're defining augmented reality, which I'm not sure, but I'm defining it as immersive experiences where like if I have the phone in front of me and I want to turn and look up and down and like try to interface with things, yes, progressive web apps can handle a degree of that. It depends on how immersive you expect it to be. to me, it's really more of a technology set or a feature inside of the overall landscape of the progressive web app. It follows the 10 defining laws, just because it's just a type of, for me, if we're talking about AR, which I think you mean augmented reality. I think that's what you were saying, or alternate. Did you say augmented or alternate reality?
Alternate reality.
I'm not sure what he means by that, but I think we're talking about like augmented reality. I'm not, so if we're talking about like being able to be in an immersive environment, it's that all I need to do is be able to send that data to the phone, because I think we're talking from a phone perspective, and the PWA will handle it just fine. It'll leverage the hardware of the device itself to do that. It can get pretty clunky though on low-end phones. I don't know what that experience would be like, to be honest with you. I've not seen something like that happen on a low-end phone, but we always see the great story of how it worked on everything, right? Like, because they've got the Samsung S8 or the brand new iPhone X, and they're like, look at this amazing experience. I don't know that all hardware is built that way. But it should not have any problems working in the PWA environment.
Mike, our next question comes from Alex, and he says, for an organization considering a PWA but not getting buy-in from stakeholders, what advice would you give the PWA advocate?
You broke up a little bit there, Chris. One more time, I apologize.
Sure. So Alex's question is, so if an organization is considering a PWA but not getting the buy-in from stakeholders above, what advice would you give to that person who's advocating for the PWA?
I would go to total cost of ownership. I think that if you go to a progressive web app model and you get into a decoupled architecture, remember, there's two things happening here. There's the progressive web app and the decoupled architecture. The first one is to have a great PWA, you need to decouple the architecture. So if we decouple the architecture, your entire design layer is now independent from your content management system. That means, in theory, I could just trade out content management systems while keeping that design layer, where right now most people have their entire design is completely intertwined into whatever content management system they're using. So if you want to make the argument, the first thing you say is, it's going to make our existing property faster. It's going to make it faster, better, cost less money, will do less maintenance, and I can increase engagement substantially. Because no matter what, here's what we know. When you do push notifications, you're going to get some kind of a return. You will get return, because if people are getting that push notification or they have that home screen icon, you're going to see an increase in numbers. That's what makes this so powerful. For the first time ever, marketers or people working in our industry, when we do a giant website at Unleashed Technologies, we're searching and we're thirsting for KPIs. If you're a data-driven organization, you understand what I'm talking about. It's very hard to achieve those things. We take all the data that we have. I'm basically saying, if you do this, we're going to guarantee an increase in these areas, because it stands to reason. It stands to reason. So when you take it to them, you can make a compelling case through not only these case studies, but your total cost of ownership long term, that you're going to have a decrease in what it's going to take for you to manage it. It's particularly powerful if you have mobile apps out there today. If you have mobile apps out there today that you're staying on top of, that you have to keep managing and maintaining and putting content into, because most people are doing that completely independently. So they have resources working on it. They have people pushing their own content in. They're keeping up with it from a development. I mean, the financial gain over the course of the first 2 years is incredible.
Mike, we have one more question here. It is from Ryan, who asks, how far away are smaller content publishers from starting to move to a PWA solution?
How are smaller publishers starting to move to a PWA solution?
Or about how far away in terms of like timeline do you feel that
they don't have to be far away at all? That's what I'm saying. It can plug in right now. The thing that they have to do is decouple their front end. That's it. So for instance, if you're on WordPress or Drupal, here's the thing that's constantly comes up is that they feel like if they make this kind of a shift, they have to completely redo their design and completely redo their website. And sometimes that makes sense, but other times it does not make any sense. Right now, if you're on a WordPress or Drupal site, I can take the existing design, decouple the architecture right now, and set you up for it. It's not as heavy lift as you think that it is. I mean, there's time associated with it. We need to change the architecture of the site, but when we do that, I guess what I'm saying is small publishers can get there very quickly. I'd say within a 6-month window, depending on what they have. I don't know. Every case is different. So depending on how mature the publisher is and how much they've got going on, all that kind of stuff that we may or may not know about. But for small publishers or mid-sized publishers, I mean, you can move pretty quickly. The question is, do you want to do a redesign and do a UX, UI? Like, do you want to do a new experience in that? If you do, it can take a little longer. But again, that doesn't mean you have to redo all the underlying technology for it. It is not a complete redo to get to a progressive web app today.
All right. Well, Mike, thank you for that. At this point, we're probably going to wrap today. You can see Mike's contact information on the screen. Feel free to reach out to us for any additional questions you might have. We will also be sending out today's recording of the webinar for reference and just in case you would like to share with anyone. But on behalf of our entire team at Unleashed Technologies, thank you for your time today, and we look forward to talking to you.
Okay, bye everyone. Thank you.